Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Bryce is Right. This is a show where I get to stand on a pedestal and pretend to be right about everything until someone invariably comes along with more knowledge on a particular subject matter and contributes to my growing knowledge base on stuff that I didn't know and educating me. So that's basically another way of saying I'm not always right. I'm just right most of the time. My goal, as always, is to promote positive atheism and secular humanism. And to that end, tonight's guest is an atheist. But he's no ordinary atheist. He's the type of atheist, actually, that I don't get a chance to interview very often. He is a lifelong atheist. And I'm going to try to pronounce his name correctly. Leonardo Villavicencio. He is a lifelong atheist, someone never really indoctrinated into religious dogma. And he's also a bit of a content creator, which I suspect we'll get into a little bit later. He is the founder of Secular Thinker International Communities and also volunteers as a support group leader on the translation team at Recovering from Religion. So he's got his hands involved in secularism for sure. And oh, by the way, he speaks 4 different languages, at least 4, possibly learning a 5th. I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask him about that as well. But multifaceted, multi-talented kind of a guy. So we're gonna spend most of our time talking about what he believes, why he believes it, the manner in which his circumstance is somewhat unusual compared to some of the other atheists that I talk to, and what he does for a living. So without further ado, Leo Villavicencio, come on
Leonardo
down. And
Villavicencio, sir.
how
It's
badly
it's
did I
great.
butcher your name?
No, it's perfect. You're almost got it. It's
Almost got it.
almost
Do me a favor, say it for me in your native tongue.
Leonardo Villavicencio.
I love it. It sounds beautiful. Okay, awesome. So, well, welcome to the show. This is not the first time that we have met. We have communicated before. Actually, I interviewed you with Justin from the EA show, who Khalil Allah now, but on the old EA show, Justin and I had a conversation, and we pretty much did what we're gonna do tonight. This is a new audience and a new experience, and maybe talk about some of the new things that you've been involved with since then. But welcome to the show. Um,
Right.
I would like
Appreciate
to
it.
ask you first and foremost about this language thing. Is it accurate that you speak 4 different languages?
Yeah, kind of. Well, honestly, if I can say it, I think I speak 2 languages properly.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, and I don't know if even I do proper English, but I hope I can make myself understand most of it.
You
Um,
sound completely intelligible to me.
Thank you. So maybe my third language would be German. My first language would be Spanish, definitely. Um, I quite like English because of its neutral register, at least in America. It has
Mm-hmm.
a neutral register in British. The British way of speaking is a little bit more like the Mexican Spanish, a little bit higher register, maybe a little bit more formal. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
asking direct the names, they go all the way around, like, may I ask your name, And the German has that attitude to it can you can say the things. And actually, that's something interesting in English that you don't have the word for usted, which is the formal you. In Spanish, we have tú, which is you, and neutral you, and you, in German they have 2 ways of saying uh, you. They have the neutral you and the formal you.
How long have you known, or how long have you spoken German? Because I'm assuming Spanish is your native language, English probably your second language, German I'm guessing is your third. When did you take up German, or how long have
I've
you been
always
speaking it?
I've always loved German, but it's been just like 3 months that I'm taking serious to get to speak a little bit more of it. And I have like kind of the survivability skills in Russian, maybe a little bit of French. I can read Latin, you know.
Have you been to any of these countries that where these languages are popular? Have you traveled to Germany, France, or Russia?
Interestingly, no, I just have friends in there. I just have a lot of friends in the US, Canada, Germany, some friends in Russia, France, even China. I have a couple of friends. It's kind of weird because they have to go, they have to make a couple of tricks to get connected and to get to speak to someone outside their country. But yeah,
Yeah,
you
that's
can do
just
that.
interesting to me that you chose to learn the language of the friends of yours that live in these other places without having actually traveled to these places. That's not what most people do. Most people, they learn a language either just as an academic, interest, or they learn it because they're going to go to another country and they want to be able to communicate there. But you haven't actually gone to any of these countries, though you have friends, and you speak to them in their native language.
Je parle un petit, you know, the ways is that have this attitude that I've trying to hold or to really keep, which is the cosmopolitan attitude, this multicultural attitude, in which instead of ostracizing or becoming strange to others, to other people's culture, you try to understand them, you try to get the climate of it, and you try to uh, go all the way through it, and instead of um, seeing it from the outside, you try to understand it from the inside because it gives you a better perspective of where those people are. Actually,
It
definitely
sound
that helps.
it sounds like making friends in the international community, friends that speak a different language than you do. It sounds like you're saying that you prefer to learn their language just to make it easier for you to understand their perspective. Do they learn Spanish when speaking with you, or do they primarily communicate in English or their own
Most
language?
most of them learn English, and if they cannot, they just communicate themselves, and they just communicate them, sorry, in their own languages.
Mhm.
But normally I make my effort to get close to those languages and to understand, there are some key instruments, key cultural spots that you can actually support yourself. You can help yourself to get into that language or into that culture easily. And
Sure.
yeah, for instance, for America, one of the ways, Mexico is also part of the American continent. So we normally, in Mexico, it's a little bit rough to hear that North American, uh, and I'm saying this with all the respect, with all the given respect, the North American people calls themselves Americans, like if you know we are Americans too, and it's a little
Yeah.
bit difficult to understand the reasons. But I
Mhm.
like if you get closer to that, I actually have had some uh, friends that told me that it's easier even to say, and you don't even think about it, you just say it, and I understand that way. I understand that, and I try to get close to that attitude
Mhm.
of being. Oh, American people is very multicultural too, and that's something that I really appreciate from even the language on itself because it's easier to understand, easier to learn, and
Yeah,
one.
usually I actually had this argument with a close friend of mine, and the point he was trying to make, he had an objection to the term American because as it's commonly used in this country, we use the term to refer to people from the United States, right? And his argument was Canadians are American too. Mexicans are American too. People in South America are American. So, it's not just an American thing, which yes, there is merit to that as well. But the reason I believe we tend to apply the word American to just citizens of the United States is because there's nothing else to call us, Unlike everyone from all these like Canada is Canada, Mexico is Mexico, Canadians, Mexicans, that all makes sense. The United States of America is the name of the country. It's the only country that has America like in the title, and there's really nothing else diminutive that you could call us other than Americans. We would have to make up like some new term. And so I think it's just mutually understood that if you say American without any qualifiers, you're talking about someone from the United States. But at the same time, I can understand how people from other countries could be offended by that. And I think maybe the solution is to say North American if you're talking about someone from the United States, Canada, or Mexico, or South American or Central American if you're talking about the collective group of people. But I don't know. I think it's a fair thing to say that if you just say American with no qualifiers, you're probably talking about a United States, citizen. I don't know. How do you feel about that? USA.
No, I mean, I mean, it's totally right. Is that it's a cultural item, and actually, I tend to think that it is true that language goes all the way deep into the mind of people that speak that language, and that's actually the reason we tend to mix culture and language. When you learn a language, you learn the culture of that country, and when you learn the culture, you start learning more about the language of that country. And particularly, I think that's actually true. And language, and as an educator, I consider that. Well, normally I don't participate as a professional. I try to keep that a little bit more in a healthy pace. But normally, when you speak about the language development, the linguistic development, you speak about the cognitive development too. And so I think that those people that actually speak well, think well, I'm actually adopting that quote from someone else. Definitely, I just don't remember the name of the person.
That's okay.
Who said it before? But definitely, when you speak, like languages go all the way deep into the mind, and the language, the linguistic items become items of the mind.
So I have to say right away, Leo, you are definitely speaking my language, pun intended, and I mean the language of psychology. I absolutely agree with that. I've said this on many occasions. Words are just tools that we use to express our thoughts, right? And so words don't actually have meaning themselves. We just impart meaning on them and hope to communicate a meaning when we use a certain word with other people. But sometimes things are lost in translation, even in the same language, right? Like my friend, the person I was talking to, having this debate with, he was American, but he objected to, he's from Pennsylvania, right? But he had issues with the term. And so now you have an American talking to another American from relatively the same culture having a clash about what this word means, if it means anything, And so when you talk about how language is tied to psychology, really, it's incumbent on us to explain what we mean when we use a certain word. I think, especially if someone else is like offended, if you are Mexican or Canadian or some other kind of North American that's not a United States American, and you are offended if I apply the word American to just people from the US, then maybe I need to explain myself to you and explain the reasons why I'm doing that. And then hopefully you could come to see my perspective, to see that he's not doing it to be exclusionary. He's doing it because of the lack of options, and it's just easier to communicate a message. Am I on track with what you were saying?
Absolutely, absolutely, and maybe not even lack of option. Maybe, I don't know. It could be, but I mean, it's also an cultural item, and I better try to interpret it from your perspective, that you're actually adopting that way of perceiving or even expressing things, and I can conceptually take it as a cultural item. If you say that you're an American person, maybe I could say that I'm American too, because I have a lot of things in common, culturally speaking, with you, or at least more things in common with you than I would have probably with a Chinese person or a Russian.
Hmm.
But definitely is a cultural item that I've learned to respect. Instead of challenging ideologically.
Yeah, that's a great attitude. And we're going to get into that more. First, I want to acknowledge some of the people in the chat right here, which is something I unfortunately failed to do. So I'm going to say hello to you guys because you guys are great. Bible Burner was the first one here, and he gave me a shout out. So thanks for watching. We got Sunny Shell producing. She's also in the background in the chat, keeping an eye out for these great conversations. John Christian, who we highlighted a little while ago, and I think I said before the show started, that's the most Christian sounding name I've ever heard, other than maybe Jesus Christ. Aunt Kathy is supporting as always, and who else we got? We got Wes in the background, my other producer. It's kind of chilling on his birthday. Happy birthday, Wes! For all of
Happy
you
birthday, Wes.
who didn't know. KCA Randy, what's going on? Thanks for stopping by. We got
Don't get
Kathy
you
Hugh.
stuck. Don't get you stuck to with. It's happy birthday in German.
Oh, thank you, because I would not have known that. So thanks for the translation. We got Kathy Humanist as well, partner in crime on my other show, Secular Soapbox. And we've got the Nightbots spilling in all kinds of useful information. We have Jim. I'm not sure if this is the Jim I know or if this is a different Jim. If you're Jim Benton, then hi. And if you're another Jim, then welcome to the show. And cool. Looks like we got through everybody. So, Leo, you were talking about the differences in culture and the differences in language and the similarities that we share. One of the similarities that you and I have is that we're both atheists. But one of the differences that we have is we came to atheism in a very different way. So, that's the preamble to this question. The first question I usually ask people when they're appearing as a guest on my show for the first time is who they are. I already know who you are because we've had a conversation before, but the audience doesn't. So introduce yourself in terms of how you grew up, what perspective you came from, and what you believe in terms of your theology.
Okay. First of all, I have to tell you that this is a great way to make a show because we definitely didn't have much like any preparation for this, so it's gonna be completely authentic. I appreciate that a lot.
Good.
And feel free to interrupt me if you think I can make a better presentation. Coming from
Don't worry. I will. I don't have a problem. No, I that is definitely something. Yeah, you don't have to remind me of. Communication for me is my second area of interest after psychology, and I'm always
Amazing.
trying to improve communication. So yeah, if
Amazing.
something's not clear,
that a lot.
yeah, if something's not clear, I will definitely ask you, just like I asked Jim, because I didn't know that this was Jim Benton. I just kind of intuitively suspected it, but I asked, and now I have the confirmation. So what's up, Jim? All right.
Perfect. So yeah, having said that, I really appreciate this way of doing it. So well, I grew up in a Catholic family. When I was a small kid, my family. Well, I can tell that I can say I'm sorry that my parents are teachers. One of like my mother is just passed away like 10 months ago, and
Oh, I'm
it's a
sorry
little
to
bit
hear
sad.
that.
But don't worry about that. We're struggling with it, but we're doing a great job together as a family, and we're pushing our effort together. So
Mm-hmm.
it's great. So don't even feel sad, sir. So I grew up in a Catholic family, and then my father particularly was kind of pushing Catholicism on me, and when we when I was around 7 years old, my father started kind of suggesting, when he saw that I had a chance to answer back, he started suggesting some of the main points of Catholicism, maybe going to church and, as he said it, visiting God in his house. And when we were there, I said like, okay, tell him that we're here. Can you tell him that we're here so he can go out and say hi? I was like, I kind of understood that he was not a physical person, but I wanted to challenge that particularly, and then actually said it. He said he's not like a physical person. He's not you. He's something that you can actually feel, but you cannot see, as the
So you were
wind.
asking about God as a child. You were questioning where God was, and you asked your
Right.
father, "Where is he? Why can't we see him?" And your father then explained to you that he's not actually a physical person. He's just kind of there
He
in a different
said
way.
he exactly said he's like the wind because you can feel it, but you cannot see it. But I said immediately, almost immediately, I said, "Well, wait a second. I can actually measure wind. I can measure its pressure. I can measure its velocity, its speed. I can
How
actually
old were
measure
you
its
when you said this?
composition, like maybe 8 years, 9 years, 7 years around
Okay,
that age.
under 10. So a
Definitely.
prepubescent
So,
child. Okay, go on. Sorry.
no, don't worry at all. And I was a little bit actually pissed off because I didn't know which was the composition of her, but I knew it had a composition. So I told him, I don't know the composition of her, but I know it has a composition. So when I grow up, I will definitely learn which the composition of Earth is, so I can tell you that we can measure it in deeper ways than you could actually measure it.
Before we go on, can I ask you how, as a 7, 8, 9 year old, you knew that air could be measured? Was that something that were you into science as a child? Did you like learn
I
about
think
this?
they had an advantage, man, because my parents are teachers. My mother and my father, both of them were teachers, and it was a little bit interesting or difficult at the same time for me because uh, both of them told me about some basics about basics of science. They told me about some basics that science questions it all, and I was like taking that for granted, and I was like not understanding why I wouldn't be able to challenge something
Yeah.
until then later on I understood that that thing was a dogma, but they didn't apparently, or they didn't want to accept that it was a dogma, so they just
Were you
went with it, I guess.
surprised? Were you surprised that your teacher parents who understood basic science and taught it to you as a child would use that example of comparing God to the wind or
Yes,
to air?
yes, definitely. It surprised me because I was not expecting that from them. I was expecting them to have a more complex way of explaining things, or maybe avoiding those teleological kind of argument. Of course, I didn't know these kind of terms back then, but I
Right.
knew it was
You knew it didn't make
much.
sense.
Definitely for me, I thought it was gonna be much more complicated than they wanted me to see it, and I was completely unaware of the fact at the beginning. I was unaware of the fact that they actually wanted me to believe that. But when
Mhm.
I started challenging, particularly my father, he understood that it was not kind of as gentile as other person could have been with that particular.
Okay. So now you are around 10 years old. You clearly are a skeptic as a young prepubescent child, which is rather unusual, especially coming from a family that, you know, I don't know any children. I think I mentioned this to you the last time we spoke. This is the first example of a story that I've heard where a child came from a religious background with religious parents who were trying to teach them religion where it didn't take. I've never heard of that before, because children generally absorb what their parents give them, true,
Right.
false, and unknown, whatever the case may be, right? This happens all over the world in all different religions, and so for you to be a skeptic at that age and not accepting of your parents' beliefs, you would agree that that's unusual, right?
I appreciate that, Bryce, but I think I had a little bit of advantage considering that my father was actually teaching me some of history. And, he actually told me. which was the way historians came with truth, and it was like they took a writing, took another from different, like from great distances in time and geographical space, and then they compared them, and it was a kind of a way of measuring if it was true or if it came from a truthful origin. Because of those things, I think I had a little bit of an advantage against other people, and I think it's not going to be completely um my credit, but I definitely understand myself as a person that is challenging it, the ideas me that come to me. I'm sorry, and I will never accept anything if I don't find it logical or actually persuasive. Even if I find it persuasive, I have to think about it twice, definitely, because my mind can't fail. I mean, why do they think their minds are not fallible? I don't know, but mine could be, and the fact
You
that
know
they
what's
were not.
ironic about this to me, Leo, is the question you just asked, why do they think that their minds are not fallible? And in my experience, most religious people do believe that their minds can be fallible. In fact, a lot of times they argue that the human mind is necessarily fallible. Humans are fallible. That's part of Christian doctrine, by the way. Humans are fallible beings. We are fallen beings. We're sinners. We're imperfect. All of
But at
that
the same
stuff
time, they
together.
have like this double standard in which they are fallible, but at the same time they're perfect or they're made up.
Well,
I don't
that's
know.
kind of where I was going. It's on the one hand you're fallible, but on the other hand, you know you're right, you know? And so I mean, I guess the argument could be, well, you're fallible as a human, but God is infallible. And if God wants you to know things, then he will allow you to know it. But how can you test that? I guess is the problem. But now we're having this is turning into an echo chamber. I think Bible
No,
Burner made a good point here, or an interesting point that I'll elaborate on. He says that theists should be automatically disqualified from teaching science. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I do think that being devoutly religious or being indoctrinated into certain dogmas does make it difficult for you to objectively teach science. Not impossible, but you would think that there would be a natural conflict there, at least with certain sciences, right? And history as well. So it's surprising to hear, like, when your father was teaching you the correct way to evaluate historical claims or scientific evidence or whatever, the way that we do it in the real world, but then at the same time holding on to the dogmatic beliefs. So how did you think about that when you realized that that's what he was doing?
very briefly, I have to give a point to the person that had the commentary. Maybe not exactly the same. I agree with that, but I don't exactly agree with that statement that theists should be disqualified because they're theists, at least
Mm-hmm.
regarding science. But I think this guy, Robert M. Sapolsky, was having, particularly I had this book near me. It came to my mind that he had an interview, and he actually said that, yeah, it kind of makes sense that if you're theist, you're allowing to yourself these specters of cognitive dissonance to yourself. So maybe you're not disqualified, maybe, to
Mm-hmm.
teach science, but you're definitely biased, and
Yes.
you should admit that you're biased. And instead of saying no, I'm not biased, I think I'm actually measuring reality with all the tools I have at hand. Not quite sure about that, at least from my perspective. And I think Robert M. Sapolsky, which is a brilliant person, a doctor in his area, which is behavioral biology too,
Mm-hmm.
he would disagree about calling unbiased uh, someone that would call themselves religious or even worse, strongly religious. So, but I'm sorry, I don't
Yeah,
want to
no, I
go.
just want to make the point, and maybe I should elaborate as well, Bible Burner. When I say I'm hesitant about agreeing with that, what I mean is I'm going to use Francis Collins as an example. Francis Collins is the current head of the National Institutes of Health, and he's, part of COVID research and all of this. I think he was the first person to map the human genome, so highly educated guy, very well accomplished medical doctor. And he's a theist. He's a Christian who believes that Jesus Christ died for sins, was resurrected, and da da da. Right. So he believes all of the standard Christian things, and yet he mapped the human genome. I would trust him to teach a class on human anatomy and physiology because he's an authority on that. I would trust him to give me some rudimentary understanding of the germ theory of disease. How he reconciles evolution with his Christian beliefs, that's on him. I don't know how he does that, but maybe he has a way of doing that. Until he starts injecting the religious elements into the lesson, like if he says, the human genome came about through supernatural processes because God said, let there be light, or whatever. Once he said that, then he's disqualified. But if he's not saying that while he's teaching, if he's just teaching the science, well, he is an authority on science. So I would say that I wouldn't discount someone like that, someone who was a competent, qualified teacher of science to teach just because they're theists. Does that make sense, Leo?
Right. No, definitely. I completely agree with that. It's just that maybe I hope that they would have this little bit of doubt of themselves, that they wouldn't call themselves like all knowing. And definitely most people that know about science, they know that that's not even possible, not even close to what science is or what science. But yeah,
Yeah.
I would go all the way like to Karl Popper, who was kind of describing science as I remember, mm, there was kind of a discussion in which there was not, it was not a discussion. There was an item that Karl Popper identified to be of differential importance, in
Mm-hmm.
which he identified an item of Einstein, which was the E equals mc squared,
Mm-hmm.
and he put that against some item of Sigmund Freud, in which he was suggesting that if a person had something wrong with them, it could be because of having a lot of hugs or because of having few hugs. And this was like not such a daring statement as Einstein's would have been, in which if Einstein's statement would have been slightly different, the result would have been dramatically different. And Karl Popper realized that Sigmund Freud was not taking um, that degree of importance when having a statement put forward. And
Yeah, a lot of
then
Sigmund Freud's look, I'm in psychology, right? So Sigmund
right,
Freud is a well-known figure in psychology. He's arguably one of the fathers of certainly psychoanalysis, right? He kind of
right,
pioneered that. And so we give Sigmund Freud credit for pioneering this idea of psychoanalysis. However, a lot of his theories, and I'm not even really going to call them theories, a lot of his assertions and hypotheses have largely been discredited because he didn't necessarily think or speak in scientific terms. He was a scientist of sorts, but he wasn't always using science when he came up with a lot of his ideas. Whereas Albert Einstein clearly was a scientist, and E equals mc squared, the scientific equation, mass relating mass with energy and etc. I don't remember what the actual how to say that out in English, but I know that I don't want to pretend to be a physicist, so I'm not even going to try. The point you're making, though, yes, I agree with, and also, crap, I don't remember where I was going with that. I had something else to say, but I forgot.
don't
So
worry, Bryce. Before you go on with that, I just wanted to say that Karl Popper statement was that science tries to disprove, or try to instead of trying to find a proof of what your statement is, Karl
Mm-hmm.
Popper said that science tries to disprove what your statement is suggesting.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
he was suggesting that science is, I don't know if I'm saying this right, disproves or tries to tries to beat all the possibilities again, instead of trying to put that statement as truth.
Right.
Uh,
So the goal in science is falsifiability, right? You want to
right,
falsify. You want to prove it, prove your all of your alternative ideas false, so that you're left with the one real one. I
right,
guess
but
the one that fits
not
your.
only not only if it's falsible, but once you found if your statement is
I'm going to
falsible,
answer that, John. Hang on.
you try to go ahead and actually try to falsify it, and then
Yeah. Right.
when you fail falsifying it, then you have a possibility for truth.
Okay. So that's science. John has a question that looks like it deals more with like theological, and this is more philosophical. So the question is for you, Leo, how do you, or how did you deal with wonder? I'm guessing he's asking as a child, but it could apply to when you're an adult as well. He says, my dealing with it had me wondering about God. That is what made me religious. So how did you basically escape the, not the trap, that's the wrong framing, but the common tendency to default to religion, because it's very easy for children to become religious, as just in general, but certainly if they have a religious influence. So how did you never assume design, or a higher power or anything like that as a child? When you would wonder about things, what conclusions did you make, or did you?
I thought reality was gonna be much more magical than whatever I could think of, and I thought that the religious perspective would be. And I normally don't speak about religious or non-religious perspectives. I normally speak in different terms, but in this case, particularly the question. So I will try to tackle it directly. So yeah, I think my mind was not gonna be able to understand most of things, and my understanding of what religion was, it was a very, very simple truth, or a very, very simple pretension of truth. Because I was not going to be as close as reality, as close to reality as um, any of these suggestions, religious suggestions particularly, would drive me
Mhm.
to get inclined to. And definitely, I didn't buy it. I didn't believe it was going to be that easy or that simple to explain everything else. Definitely not. And maybe I thought that truth, reality, I mean, was going to be much more magical than they wanted me to think it was. And it's much more complicated to become to have what we have today as a complex entity, to be cognitive entities in a realm of different animals. Yes,
Mhm.
it's very, very difficult for us to even get a grasp of how all that environment was actually um, happening. Uh, but I thought my mind was not necessarily understanding what that truth was, but that there's the word be to think I had the truth. There's kind of an arrogance
Mhm.
between that. The for at least my perspective was more concise with the religious perspective, which was like I understand it everything, I know it all, I have all this knowledge, and I know how to explain all this stuff. I don't. They thought they had the answer. I know they didn't. It wasn't satisfying for me. Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that you had an understanding of reality that necessitated a complex answer, and when people provided you the answer with God, you saw that as insufficient because God doesn't have
Extremely
any
simple.
as what?
It was extremely simple, too simple for me.
Too
Not
simple.
maybe, yeah, it was not. It was not enough complexity of as I saw in the universe. In the
Yeah.
universe is more complex than they wanted me to think it was.
That's, and that's interesting to me because I have conversations with Christians, Muslims, various other theists of different background who say that God is infinitely complex. Like he's and they acknowledge that the universe is complex, and their answer for the complexity of the universe. In fact, it is the very complexity of the universe that a lot of times they make the God argument. They say, how could a universe this complex come about without a mind, without a complex mind to create it? How can order come from chaos? And so there has to
But
be a complex, an
they
infinitely
could.
complex mind.
I mean, all that complexity was within their minds. They just didn't know it was there. Maybe it's the way they have to explain everything they see, but that doesn't necessarily correlate with what the observation
Mm-hmm.
could offer. You know,
Yeah, I think, and this is just me answering, I think that God doesn't really explain anything. It's presented as though it's an explanation for the universe, but it's an insufficient explanation because it has no explanation itself, right? It's like
right?
saying magic, but what is magic? How does it work? What is the mechanism? Where does it come from? That's never explained. It's just, in fact, the whole reason we appeal to magic is because it's not explainable. Magic is the thing we use when something happens and we can't explain it. It's magic.
Back.
Some people say magic, some people say the supernatural, other people say God. But these all work the same way or don't work the same way, and that they're just posited as being an explanation for something that we don't understand. Because if you can't explain God, then it doesn't work to explain anything else to me.
You're hitting the nail in the head, man. Actually, the definition. I think at someone. I'm sorry. Some at some point in my life, I heard that the first philosophical action was calling things by their proper name, and probably, yeah, the first step would be to review the definition of magic, of what something magical, and it's
Mhm.
something that couldn't be explained with normal, natural, logical terms. So I think you're hitting the nail in the head, man. Uh, if
That's
you
one of the
have,
problems actually with a lot of these, with a lot of religious terms or religious loaded, you know, language. That's a similar issue because we can say magic, right? Just to get it out of religion. Magic is still like supernatural. We can talk about magic, but we're not talking about anything that's mutually understood until someone defines what magic is, which it's never defined by anything other than, anything that can't be done through natural means. But that's a negative description, right? You're telling me what it's not, but you're not telling me what it actually is. And so
exactly.
that seems to be the case with the supernatural, you know, this thing that's higher than nature or responsible for nature. Well, how do you know that there is such a thing?
Yeah,
That's
exactly, man.
that's
There's something that
God.
that I think it's kind of natural for me. Since I realized that there was science. I'm sorry to interrupt you, right?
No, no,
It's just that I
please. This is
wanted to
your
get
this is
this
your
out of my chest, man. This
do
is
it.
something that I really consider to be, or that I suppose it was a little bit more natural that in the world I would find people more inclined to science or sciences in themselves because that was a rational way to explain what was outside in the world. And when I said rational, I meant I went all the way back to the definition, and it's something like having a kind of a recognition of what consistency is, and
Mhm.
reality is consistent. So we try to thanks for that. I appreciate that, and so we say that rationality would be something that is particularly consistent uh, with the consistency of nature. So when I went ahead in my life, I thought there was going to be a much higher number of scientists in the world. But when I realized that most people was kind of refusing their chances to evaluate the things for themselves, I was kind of like, whoa, 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 what the hell is happening here? I don't know why they are refusing their chances to evaluate things by themselves, and they just drop it all and try to accept the first answer the neighbors come with. It's kind of ridiculous for me because it's so amazing to go ahead and explore and understand everything you have in front of you, particularly
So
when you're a child.
why do you think that is the case then?
I
If
think
you expected most people to be more science minded, and then you found that most people are not. So
it
what
was
do you
such
attribute
a
that to?
strange world when I was a kid, man. When I was a kid, I was like, what the freaking hell is happening here? I
Yeah.
didn't understand at all why all these people was refusing their chances. But once, and this happened more late in, I mean, later in my life, that I found this guy called Jean-Paul Sartre, and
Hmm.
he's an existentialist, together with Martin Heidegger and Albert Camus was one of the three guys that actually were dominant in existentialism.
Hmm.
Uh, my preferred my preferred existentialist of all. He said that the the man had this hole within himself with the form of a god, and we used to think as we used to think through that filter. We
I don't
wanted.
know. I think that was already highlighted, but I wanted to highlight it again because I wanted to go back to that. The fact that you escaped or resisted indoctrination to uh, basically wonder why everyone else is indoctrinated and you are not. So now I do remember asking you this question. It was kind of out of left field when we had our conversation on the EA show, and I'm not sure if everyone knew where I was going with it or why I was asking it, but I think you might be able to figure out why I'm asking it now. You have had your IQ tested before, correct?
Yes, I think I had.
Okay. And do you don't have to say what it was, but do you remember where on the scale you fell? Was it like sort of
Definitely above
higher end?
100.
Pardon?
Above 100, like
Right.
let's
So
say between 100 and 150, more or less.
yeah, which is wide enough. I know it's closer to the 150 area, and I'm only saying that to say what made me ask the question has to do with the way that you interpreted reality as a child, which I would say is atypical, you know. And the fact that you were able to recognize that the tools that were used to indoctrinate so many other people were insufficient or shouldn't be convincing at such a young age. So I would suspect that that probably has something to do with why you were able to resist indoctrination as well. It's you spoke about the advantage of having science educators as parents, but at the same time there's probably something a little bit more than that. There's something going on psychologically in your psychological development that may have given you an advantage over the average person. If the average person's at 100 and you are much higher than that at that stage of development, you may have had certain insight into how to evaluate claims or how to think critically that is beyond the average 9-year old. Is that possible?
I would definitely, first of all, thanks for considering that as a possibility. I would love to think that's the way. I don't know if I'm gifted, but I can say that I did the best I could with the tools I had at hand. Because even if I had a higher possibility of success, if I
Mm-hmm.
didn't use those tools, I was going to be exactly in the same position that someone with a better position, even socially or geographically speaking, economically speaking. And I wanted to do the best I could with the tools I had at hand. So
Exactly. And you know, I just complimented you, so to speak, but just because somebody is more advanced cognitively at an earlier age doesn't mean that they're perfect. For instance,
right, definitely.
I have to correct you on a mistake that you made a little while ago. A few minutes ago, you used the word scientism, and I'm not sure if you meant it this way, but in English that tends to be derogatory. The way that usually I hear theists using the word scientism to refer to excessive belief in the power of science, or people
As
who
if
believe that
science was a
science,
dogma.
yeah, as if it's a religion, And so I do not think that scientism is the way to go if we're using that definition. So, and I don't think you meant it that way, but I think you meant science, having a curiosity, being scientifically curious and pursuing that, thinking in that way, rather than scientism, which is thinking that science is the only method of truth. Having said that, I
Right.
might as well ask the question: do you believe science is the only method for which we can arrive at truth?
No, definitely. I think it's one of the tools we as humans have. I'm sorry if I said that term. I could have wanted to say science is,
Mm-hmm.
or the way of science, But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that science is a tool. I understand it as a tool. I do not. I think that properly used, science is not only not a dogma. Science is not a dogma, but properly used is actually the way to escape dogma and dogma, because science forces you to question it all, while dogmas force you to not to question whatever is in front of you. And I think science, for the method it has, for the science is a method particularly. So I think the scientific method is a way for us to escape the prison of the mind we were born into. And yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
great
it's a
answer. And it's a great point as well. And it kind of defeats the charge or the accusation of scientism in a way, because science is self-correct.
exactly
Even if someone was into scientism, if they seemed dogmatic about it, science is self-correcting, right? And
right.
in science, you're allowed to say I don't know. In fact, you
And
begin with I don't know.
you're forced to go with I don't know, because if you start to think you have the chance of truth, you
Mhm.
even with that, as you said it, you have to force yourself to falsify that, to go against whatever your beliefs or your initial thoughts are, and you have to go against that to prove that that's not right. And when you fail, and even if you fail repeatedly under controlled circumstances, and when other people fail to demonstrate that that's false, that is when something comes forward that's possibly truthful, not even necessarily truthful, just as possibly truthful. And that is what most people don't actually understand about science. And that is what actually I love from my job as an educator, to put forward the rules of emancipating yourself from these particularly nasty way of people of encapsulating everyone into a way of thinking, into a way of being. And I think science is a great chance even for us to create new paradigm. I think I'm saying that wrongly. Paradigm, or it's a great way to create new ways of being, new maybe not ideologies, but possibly an ideology that could escape from being an ideology, but particularly like a way of being that would be necessarily useful for the human being. I think that's humanism.
Yeah, and I think I left that out of my opening. We talked about your parents being educators. You followed in their footsteps because you are also a teacher of sorts, aren't you? What do you
Definitely.
teach? And where do you
Uh,
teach?
Normally, I teach mathematics, physics, and languages mostly. Yep,
So that's pretty broad and different. Mathematics, physics, and like I guess math and physics is sort of related. But we also talked about your language aptitude as well. So that seems to make sense as well. When you teach language, you are teaching Mexican students in Spanish? Are you teaching them Spanish language or English language or other languages?
I teach normally Spanish and English, and when people want to get into a new language, I have like a couple of tools to make themselves better in self-teaching themselves, as self-taught people,
Mm-hmm.
and they become more. They gather some weapons to go against the learning that it's often a challenge of training your brain to learn again. Because when you're a kid, that comes naturally, but when you're a grown up, it becomes normally a challenge to
Mm-hmm.
learn something new. And I think that's another thing that goes back to the question you did of why would we tend to have these mechanisms of dogmatic kind of mechanisms. Just yesterday I was actually watching it. I'm sorry to go uh,
No, go ahead.
out of the topic just a little bit. I just wanted to mention that Recovering from Religion had a presentation yesterday in which there was a doctor, a PhD. I don't actually remember the speciality of this person, but he spoke about the biology of religion, and then he presented a couple of behaviors that are not mutually exclusive between atheists and religious people. So atheists and religious people have, interestingly, a couple of similar behaviors that could be traced to our biology
Yeah.
mostly.
Human
And
human behaviors.
yes,
Yeah.
so you
Because
can
we're all
actually
human, right?
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember you were also speaking about psychology, and I have something interesting that it's gonna be difficult for some people to digest. That I
Mhm.
actually read this, but take a look. This
Oh,
means Psychology and Alchemy from Carl Gustav Jung.
yeah, and that looks like
The
it's in an that's I'm not sure what language that is in.
Spanish,
Okay. Okay. So
but
that's what I thought it
tons.
said, but I wasn't sure.
It has tons of resources in Latin, and this was a gift from a person that I have that I hold dear, very close to me. Uh,
Hmm.
this person actually gifted me this book.
It
Are
looks
amazing.
quite so it's illustrated as well. So that looks like a pretty good a helpful tool.
Yeah, and it
Um
has the references where these pictures come,
yeah,
and
that
it's
looks
amazing.
like Ra or Apophis or one of the Egyptian gods that you were just showing. I know you can't see it, but that's what it looked like.
I see it through the camera, but yeah, it's hard for me to visualize what's in there. But yeah, there are lots and lots of items to take from, and
Have you read the whole thing?
not really. I still have to finish this huge book. It's
Okay, well,
huge,
let me know,
but it's beautiful.
and also let me know. I sent you a paper actually that I wrote on
Right,
religion and rationalism, and I
right.
think I mentioned Francis Collins earlier as an example to Bible Burner about how I would trust theist scientists depending on the subject matter. In the paper that I wrote, I use him as an example of someone who came to religious beliefs through unscientific means, despite being a scientist. So I look forward on your uh, appraisal of that and your evaluation. This is a project I did for one of my university studies. I think it was my capstone actually, but that's neither here nor there. We'll talk about that more. We're coming up toward the end, but I did want to get a couple of final questions out regarding you mentioned recovering from religion a little while ago. What exactly is it that you do there?
I am well. Recovering from Religion has support groups
Mhm.
for people that want to uh, maybe just to hang out with people that are mind like, uh, that they don't have. If you want to find people without a religion, or
Mhm.
you want find a way to live more secularly without religious influence, and you
Do me
don't
a
know how
favor.
to work.
The
Yeah,
book that you
definitely.
were just holding up, the title in English, was it
Would be something like Psychology and Alchemy.
An Alchemy, right? And I don't know if that's actually, if there is a direct translation in English that puts it that way. So we'll probably have to do some research. But I know Carl Jung, and yeah. So you just look up the author and find his works, because that would be a translation into Spanish, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right, definitely, probably could be.
Yeah.
This is another interesting book of him.
The
Would be something
complete,
like
what is that?
something like the complexes and the unconscious mind.
Okay. All of his books are going to be on psychology. So Sonny,
Definitely.
you know him because you're into psychology as well. So I'm not even going to explain. So
But I think you
cool.
have to read these guys like with gloves. You know, you have to be careful while reading them because you don't want to eat them whole. Because there is going to be a couple of things that are going to be definitely discontinued today. They still use terms as soul because, you know, soul could be for some like the ancient study of the mind, but
Right.
could also mean a ton of pseudo-scientific stuff. So you have to be really, really careful about that.
Yes.
Psychology and alchemy, that makes sense to me.
Yes. What you just said is accurate, because the meaning of words have changed. And just to piggyback on that last point, I will say about soul, the meaning that most people believe soul to mean today is different than even the authors who wrote the Bible. The ancient, uh, the Jews who were telling these stories had a very different concept of what soul meant, and it didn't
That,
mean what Christians think it means now, right? But that's the common usage of the word today. So,
but also, you know, you're gonna be in a different stage of the time scale, so you're gonna be definitely surrounded with a lot of cultural items that would have been interpreted as facts and stuff like that. So you definitely have to be contextualized historically, and yeah.
yeah. What have you got coming up in the future? What kind of projects are we looking at? I know you've got some
So
stuff on the horizon. So,
I hope this could be a good way to present ourselves as the work we already have out there. If
mhm.
you want to search for the page we have had been working 8 years ago
Well,
in.
actually, you guys won't have to search for it. If you just look in the description, I already have links to it in the description below. So if you are interested in recovering from religion or secular thinker, we have a link to the websites for both, as well as the Facebook page for secular thinker. Is that something that you're still maintaining? This was
Definitely.
something I copied and pasted from the old EA show, and sometimes people have Facebook pages that they let go. So that
Thank
was
you.
over a
No,
year ago, I think.
I appreciate that because I really got a little bit busy with gathering a link tree, but I will definitely working in a link tree.
Mhm.
I already have a presentation in WordPress about secular thinker, what we do,
Mhm.
what we have been doing for the last 8 years, and the kind of community we have. We focused not only in the secular or atheist communities, we mostly focus on the scientific communities that want to have a space, secular spaces to communicate with people and to find new friends that are mind-like, and free thinkers, you know, humanists of all kinds are right there, waiting for you to get uh, to have them as friends, to join and jump into new topics, to present yourself, even if you
This
want to
sounds
work with
very
us.
similar. This sounds very similar to another project that Sonny and I are involved with called Promethean Secular Frontier. And I actually have a show on that YouTube channel as well that I would like to invite you to come on sometime
Thank
in the
you.
future, because there's plenty of more to talk about with respect to humanism and recovering from religion. If you are opening to having a conversation about morality and moral systems, I'm sure we would like to get your perspective on that. And yeah,
Thanks for that.
you got some compliments in the chat And so this was a great conversation. And how much time do you have? Are you free to continue for a few minutes longer after the show? We have a Discord link that we like to get together with some of the people who are in the chat to talk about the show. And no pressure. I know we didn't discuss that beforehand, but if you have some time and you would like to come into the Discord, we invite you to come into the Discord, and people can ask you some questions.
Definitely. I think I still have some minutes. Definitely. Don't worry.
Awesome. So with that in mind, if you guys enjoy the show and you would like to continue the conversation with Leonardo Villavicencio, is that close? Did I get it?
Don't worry. You almost got it.
Close. Almost got it. With the great Leo here. If you would like to continue the discussion, take a trip over to Discord. The link is in the chat. Should be Nightbot should have provided that for you guys. And like I said, we have links to all of Leo's stuff in the description below. I advise you to check out his website, particularly Secular Thinker, which is kind of your own baby, right? And then Recovering from Religion for anyone who didn't grow up like Leo, but was actually indoctrinated and then found their way out. That might be a resource more applicable to you. So, Leo, thanks a lot for appearing as a guest on my show.
Thanks to you, Bryce. You've been a great friend and an amazing person for me to be able to get to speak with. So I definitely would love to keep working with you in future projects. Count on me.
I shall take you up on that. Hang out backstage after we do the credits roll. For everyone else, if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to hit like. Sometimes people watch and they just forget. They just get caught up in how great the show is, right? I'm stepping on a pedestal right now, but you forget all of the things that like help us produce more content, like liking and subscribing to Tang. I do this show weekly, Tuesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So tune in next week for, I don't know what we're going to do. Well, I'll think of something. I'll think of something to keep you guys entertained. Like I said, don't forget to subscribe to Tang for more awesome secular content. For producers Oz, producer Wes, producer Sunny Shell, my name is Brycearonee. Have a good morning, have a good afternoon, and a good night. I will see you next time on The Bryce is Right.